This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell is going on? And are you unburdened by the past?
I believe in what can be unburdened by what has been, Danny, because that's the new philosophy of the Democratic Party. We have a new nominee. It happened in an instant. It happened on Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it these days. President of the United States, Joe Biden, withdrew from the race without even a picture of him signing the letter, just a letter written by somebody else on Twitter, put out into the world saying he's stepping down as the Democratic nominee and going to focus all his attentions on being president for the next few months. And Kamala Harris announced that she was ready to earn and win the nomination, and 2 days later, she locked it up. I swear to God to you, Daddy, I was on Fox News Sunday on Sunday before this news broke, and we were anticipating and discussing it and I was on with a Democratic analyst, and I was basically saying, like, it sounds like this is the Soviet Politburo election for the general secretary. And there was like, how dare you say it's not democratic? There's a process. There's a process involved. Well, we saw the process. It took 2 days of phone calls and hand-wringing. Nobody dared challenge her. She was anointed, and now she's heading to be the Democratic nominee. It's quite a development.
Well, look, I mean, it was quite a development, but, if in fact what we said many times, you and I together, and you and I separately many times, that Joe Biden was no longer able to assure the American people that he would be able to serve for the 4 years, and that he was probably not competent to be serving even now, then something has to happen. So I guess I'm not too irate about the process. I understand completely that if you're the Democratic Party and you have been for the last month plus sniping at your sitting president, calling him non compos mentis, generating news stories behind the scenes to push him out the door, despite the fact that he is holding on with his cold, dead hands, no surprise that they, and frankly, any politically sentient being, whether on the right or the left, would have wanted to move very quickly to say, okay, that's over. Thank you very much. Forget the man behind the curtain. Now we've got the woman behind the curtain. Take her.
Well, and also after having spent the last, 6 months, quite frankly, more than that, 2 or 3 years,
covering up,
insisting that it was a cover-up, lying to the American people, saying that,
right.
And by the way, the liar-in-chief was Kamala Harris, who basically said that he was doing cartwheels in the Oval Office with her, and he was completely on top of his game and all the rest of it. And the reason they don't have a democratic process to choose their nominee and don't have any process by which to test their nominee, because one of the advantages of having a primary in a democracy is that you find out who's a good candidate and who isn't, and who can perform on the hustings. And they passed up on all those opportunities. And not only that, they attacked the journalists. We just had Annie Linsky from the Wall Street Journal on the podcast. She was mercilessly attacked for having reported 3 weeks before the debate that he was on the decline. And they said, absolutely no. Even after the debate, I forgot the guy's name, the press secretary, Andrew Bates.
Oh, God.
Like that.
Oh, he's so awful.
He tweeted out saying, do you believe that Joe Biden doesn't have a PhD? It was after the NATO press conference. He doesn't even have a PhD in foreign policy, because that was a master performance. Good Lord. The fact that he didn't fall asleep in the middle of the press conference is a sign that he has a PhD. They lied to the American people, and now they're stewing in the result of their lies.
Look, again, this is a situation where the Democrats wedged themselves with the enthusiastic help of Joe Biden and Mrs. Dr. Joe Biden and convicted felon Hunter Biden, just in case we were missing having a convicted felon in the White House. They wedged themselves into this position. This was a bed entirely of their own making. And so, yeah, of course, it's a nightmare. And frankly, they should have thought about this sooner, because you and I could have told them a year ago that Joe Biden wasn't up to the job. And that lie is perhaps the most damaging. And the people who suffer the most, frankly, are the Democrats and their voters, who would have liked to have had a viable candidate to stand up against Donald Trump, who they think is the worst threat to the American nation since the revolution. So fair enough. It's a bet of their own making. But, we're talking to one of our colleagues today who all of you know, and they're not going to be very happy with the person who has parachuted in to save them.
Well, first of all, she was always the candidate. Does any serious person think that Joe Biden would have served 4 years if he had stayed on the ballot and won the election? Of course not. He can barely get through the finish line for the election, much less serve 4 more years. He would have been 86. The actuarial tables suggest he wouldn't have even lived to the end of his term, much less been able to serve as commander-in-chief. She was going to be the candidate anyway. She was going to be the president anyway if he won. And so we've just formalized and brought out in the open what was previously true, which is that she was the Democratic nominee from the beginning.
But look, I think talking about Kamala, Mamala, as I'm now going to call her forever, is distracting from what the real issues are. When Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, which you and I were not too happy about, when Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, people said, this is who owns the Republican Party. This is the legacy of the Republican Party. And the answer is exactly the same for the Democratic Party. This party is owned by the elite coastal California, New York, far left, right? As you say, the squad administration. And that is going to be a much bigger problem for them than the fact that Donald Trump owns the Republican Party, which is really
100% because they don't present swing voters with a benign alternative to Trump, right?
Right.
So if you're a swing voter in one of these swing states, and keep in mind the last election was decided by about 42,000 people in 3 swing states. If you're one of those voters and you think Biden is a disaster, but you're not sure about Trump, you're torn. And all the Democrats would have to do is present you with a moderate, unthreatening, benign alternative, and they can't bring themselves to do that. And then on top of that, they have somebody who is almost completely untested. Kamala Harris has never gotten a primary vote for president in her entire career, despite now her second campaign.
Did you see that great line from Bill Maher?
No.
Oh my God, I'm going to butcher it, but he has been on fire this year, I have to say. And he said, well, you could count the number of delegates that she has on one hand if it had no fingers.
That's exactly right. So you know who has more primary votes than Kamala Harris?
Nikki Haley.
Dean Phillips. He got
yeah.
511,000 votes. You know who else has more primary votes than Kamala Harris? Marianne Williamson.
Oh my God.
You know who has more primary votes than Kamala Harris? Uncommitted. Literally, uncommitted has more votes than Kamala Harris. And yet she's the Democratic nominee. And the problem with that is that now the Democrats are going to find out whether or not she's a good candidate or not. Because she's going to go into the campaign and she's going into the buzzsaw of the MAGA movement. And it is not easy to take that on and to fight that. And Donald Trump has thus far been a much more disciplined, much more effective candidate than he has been in previous elections. And he's also brutal and he can take you apart. And we're going to find out, the Democrats are going to find out, can she stand up to that? Can she compete? Can she take him on? And I don't know that she can. And wouldn't it have been nice, if you're a Democrat, wouldn't you have liked to have like a trial run? And that's why you have a preseason, Danny. That's why in hockey, you have a preseason and you test out the players and you give them a chance to see if they can perform. And then you have the regular season. The Democrats, they freaked out because of one bad debate performance. Imagine if Kamala Harris has one bad debate performance. Or if she has one bad interview. I mean, this is not a woman who is known to be terribly articulate, and she doesn't have the excuse of being senile. If she goes out and starts saying stupid things, as she has done throughout her vice presidency, and people look at her and say, this woman's too dumb to be in the White House, they've got no fallback. If they'd done that in the primaries, and she had done that and fallen on her face, then they could pick somebody else. But now they can't pick anybody else because they're stuck with her. It's either going to work or it's not.
Mark, I think the problem is that you're burdened by what has been. And you need to be unburdened, Mark, by what has been and move on with what will be.
Well, let's unburden our listeners from this conversation and bring in our guest.
Everybody remembers the fantastic Rui Teixeira. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He focuses on the transformation of party coalitions and the future of American electoral politics. So he's constantly busy. Before he joined AEI, he was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He is the co-author of the book, The Emerging Democratic Majority in 2002, and the follow-on. Perhaps not supposed to be the follow-on, but Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes, that was put out in 2023, a fantastic book.
Here's our interview. Rui, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always aghast to talk to you guys.
Well, there's nothing going on, so we're going to have to struggle for topics to discuss.
Nothing to talk about.
So we have a new nominee for the Democratic Party, apparently. 2 days ago, she said, my intention is to earn and win this nomination. And 2 days later, she has all the delegates she needs to secure it. So she's apparently a very talented campaigner because she locked it up
Indeed.
in 2 days.
She's not the nominee yet. You're acting like the whole process is wired and there's no Democratic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's not wired.
Yeah, she's
So,
not.
Okay, so she's
Probable, highly probable nominee.
presumptive nominee, as they used to say.
Presumptive. There you go.
So I'm very disappointed because I'm going to Chicago for the Democratic convention, and I was looking forward to being at an actual convention where they're, as Dana Perino famously said on Fox last week, where they're going to decide the nominee in vape-filled rooms.
Right.
Apparently there'll be no vape-filled rooms, Rui. What's going on?
Yeah, no, you may be in for like a stupefying few days of box checking and other uninteresting type speeches, lionizing the Democrats' commitment to all that's good in the world. And of course, how wonderful, how incredible is our new advocate, the new head of our party, Kamala Harris. So that should be a lot of fun.
I mean, damn, Rui. Can I just say, look, I will confess to you, I feel a little bit sorry for her. You know, she's a little bit like the dog that caught the car.
Exactly.
And I suspect she has no idea what to do with it. But she is having a little mini moon, a little honeymoon. Maybe we should call it a baby moon. I don't know what it is. And, you know, everyone is lined up as if we lived in Moscow in 1926. Everybody is lined up behind her. Everybody has opened their wallets.
The Politburo has spoken.
The
Right.
kulaks are gone.
I don't think anyone's going to be dragged off to the camps, though. So, I mean, and no one's been shot. So, I mean, look on the bright side.
That's true. Only Donald Trump. All right. We are jesting because, in fact, in this day and age, there's nothing else to do about politics other than make light of it. Setting aside all of the good times we were having making fun about this process, we have the first Black woman running for president. It's, you know, exciting in some ways. Without leading the witness, what do you think her prospects are, Rui?
Right. Well, actually, I mean, we would be remiss here if we didn't point out her Asian background as well, which has since been memory hold, right? That's how she ran as an original political creature in the Bay Area. She had introduced herself as Kamala Devi Harris, I believe, but that seems to have gone by the board. So she doesn't talk about being Asian anymore, but she sure does talk a lot about being Black. Well, if identity politics is truly the way to go here, certainly having a Black woman at the head of the ticket, you know, the optimistic interpretation of this from the Democrats' standpoint is this will signal to everybody the old white guy is out of the way. Their shortfall among Hispanic and Black voters and even young voters will shortly be closed because they'll all be much more excited about Kamala Harris than they were about Joe Biden. I've got my doubts about that, though I wouldn't be surprised if she enjoyed a little boomlet to begin with. Things closed a bit because she's just the new kid on the block and she's got an enormous amount of favorable coverage. There's always possibility of differential partisan non-response in surveys for a while where Democrats all of a sudden, hey, I want to take that survey. But we'll see. We'll see. But I'm not convinced it really solves the underlying problems the Democrats have in terms of issues they're on the wrong side of, like inflation and immigration and crime and what have you. And importantly, this is something I wrote about last week about sort of the GOP's big bet on the working class. That's how they're hoping to take this election. By and large, not only just the white working class, but the black and Hispanic working classes where they've been doing better. Does this stop the bleeding from the Democratic side to have Kamala Harris ahead on the ticket? I think that might not be the case because I think a lot of these working class voters who looked ready to vote for Trump, and let's not forget, this is some huge shifts taking place. Biden lost the working class vote overall in 2020 by 4 points, and we're looking at 15 or 20 point margins now, deficits. So can Kamala close that? Maybe, but it's a hole that'll have to be dug out of, and it's for a party who is not popular, for a administration whose record is not popular, and to whom Kamala is irrevocably tied. She was, let's not forget, the border czar, and so on. So I think there's a lot of stuff that working class people and voters are not happy about that I don't think they'll be that much happier about just because Kamala Harris is now the nominee, even if they're the same color or at least non-white as Kamala. I'm not sure that's what politics is really about that much these days. We have seen, overall, we've seen a decline of racial polarization to some extent, an increase of class polarization. You could argue that Kamala would walk right into the class polarization thing. She seems a perfect candidate to appeal to your college-educated neighbor in the suburbs, but maybe less well-designed to appeal to a working class voter who's just scraping by and doesn't really get what Democrats are about these days. So that's my broad brush. I carefully avoided saying anything more specific because we don't have any data yet. We know from the polls that have been done comparing Harris to Trump, but this was while Biden was still going to be the nominee, that they don't perform that much differently. Harris is pretty unpopular. She doesn't run that much better against Trump, if at all. You look at underlying demographics, not a lot of difference, too, in how Harris was performing with target demographics like Hispanics and blacks and young people. I think the safest prediction is this is not a game changer, but does it change things at the margin enough to give the Democrats a somewhat better chance? Well, maybe. But again, we lack data at the current time.
I wanted to follow up with you with one question. And again, I don't even know if you can answer it either. But I have to say...
Well, if not, I'll make it up.
So I wrote this, and I really feel it's true, but I actually don't know why I feel it's true. It's just a gut instinct. There was all this talk that there was no way that Biden could step down and that they could push aside this woman of color. I just can't imagine to myself that the Black or the Asian community, frankly, views Kamala Harris as their mascot. Is there any evidence to suggest that they do?
Yeah, we saw an occasional poll where she seemed to be doing somewhat better among non-whites than Biden, but it's very unclear, and her favorability ratings aren't that much higher. So yeah, this is purely an identity-based assumption, right? It's not because there's like a ton of data, even anecdotally, that suggests she is widely loved in the Black and Hispanic communities. But it is nevertheless a fact. She's a black, she's a woman. And, she does have a pretty active social media activist sort of contingent called the K-Hive that has been mercilessly pushing her forever. And they're convinced, the only reason anyone wouldn't support Kamala Harris is they're racist and a sexist. So, there's that factor. But I think it was probably correct that it was going to be really difficult for the Democrats to push her aside or even have a very open process, given the sort of internal politics of the Democratic Party today and how gingerly they treat matters of race and gender and the extent to which identity politics is still, it's like the tribal religion, right? It's almost sacral, as I think someone has put it. Sacred totems of race and gender must be obeyed. So was anyone really going to challenge that? Was Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer or whoever going to come out of the woodwork and say, well, while I have the deepest respect for Kamala Harris, I'm actually a much better candidate, to which the reply would be, you racist, sexist swine, get out of the way. So I just think they were caught between a rock and a hard place. It's not exactly a state secret that she has been basically a pretty terrible retail campaigner, the electoral underperformer in California. She has a pretty off-putting manner that we'll see if she can endear herself to voters. But, to some extent, what you see is what you get. She is who she is, and she may have a hard time really reinventing herself. I mean, this burst of positive coverage that we're seeing now, and we'll see for a week or two, eventually will have to subside and tougher questions will be asked. She'll be more out there. People have more of a chance to see her. So yeah, I'm skeptical that they could have done anything else but what they did. And I don't think it has that much to do with sort of a lot of careful research showing how popular she is in the Black Hispanic communities and with young voters. I don't think that had a lot to do with it because I don't think there's a lot of evidence along those lines.
Well, yeah, because Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly, those would be game changers as a nominee. But the party of identity politics was never going to allow a white man to displace the first black woman to lead a ticket of a major party in this fight. So the Democrats' campaign up until now has been that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, literally, that our democracy is on the ballot. Is the fact that all these people are not getting into the race evidence that they don't buy their own line? You know, if you're Mark Kelly or Josh Shapiro, you're looking at this and saying, Kamala Harris doesn't do any better than Biden did against Trump. So why do I want to be the captain of the Titanic just before it hits the iceberg? Trump can only be a one-term president. It's going to be an open seat in 4 years. Why would I get in now and get crosswise with Jim Clyburn and the CBC and get accused of being a racist for challenging her when I can just sit back and watch the Titanic sink and then offer myself up to lead the party after that? I mean, does it mean that they don't buy it, that they don't buy their own propaganda?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I don't think Biden would have been the presumptive nominee for as long as he was, despite all the evidence about how weak a candidate he was, if people really did think that truly 100% believe that if Donald Trump is elected, it's the end of the republic. I dare I say it, but I think there was some exaggeration there. But I think what you're pointing out, Mark, in terms of the individual candidate electoral calculus here, don't want to be cynical about this, but yeah, I think for a lot of these people, they're gaming it out. Okay, I can't really stand up to Kamala. If I did, I'd get hammered. But if she stands, she's probably going to lose. And then I'll be in a much better situation down the road. Trump can only serve one term, et cetera. I think anyone who doesn't believe those calculations are going on with those kinds of ambitious politicians has rocks in their head. Clearly it's going on, and clearly it's a factor.
So let's talk a little bit more about this deficit that you've talked about, the working class, because I think this is really, this goes to the heart of the Democratic Party problem, which is fundamentally that, the headline could be, the problem isn't Kamala Harris, the problem is the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party doesn't have a platform that addresses the people who need to vote for its concerns. I mean, is that right? Or could that have been assuaged if they turned around and picked somebody different?
Well, I think, if they'd picked someone different who had a somewhat different profile and could more plausibly present themselves as a different kind of Democrat, it would have been helpful. But the underlying problem does have, I think, a lot to do with the party as a whole and how its profile has changed over the years and the policies it tends to promulgate, the sort of cultural ethos that surrounds the party, the issues a lot of Democrats think are important. To some extent, the looking down their schnoz aspect of how they tend to look at most of the working class of the country, which is they're really as enlightened as we people here in New York, Seattle, and Washington. I think all that's a big deal. I think, the record of the Biden administration, even though it's lionized by a lot of Democrats and some analysts, right, some economists, they said they were developing a new economic model with their various investments and so on. But the way the working class has actually experienced the Biden administration has not been good as far as they're concerned. They do think prices have gone up too much. They do, worry about rents and houses. They do worry about lots of things that are sort of basic, sort of day-to-day aspects of how they live their lives, which they don't feel have improved much under Biden. And, they're, as I've argued before, and we've talked about this, I think, the Democrats' commitment to a clean energy transition, which has driven a substantial amount of their policy, including the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, working class voters could care less, basically. They're more concerned with cheap, reliable, and abundant energy and jobs. They're just not that interested in reconfiguring the economy to meet these carbon emission reduction targets, net zero, and so on. But obviously, it's extremely important to people who tend to run the Democratic Party and be its most visible advocates, and including, of course, Kamala Harris. Let's not forget, she was 100% for the Green New Deal. In fact, she said in 2019, we should nuke the filibuster so we can pass the Green New Deal. That's not to mention all the other positions she took when she was trying to run for the nomination in 2019, 2020. So she is a representative to some extent of the party's whole cultural, political policy outlook at this point. But that's because that's where the party is. And, it would take some effort to present a different profile than the sort of default image people have of the party and its default sort of culture and policies. Maybe someone like Josh Shapiro could do it. I don't know. But I don't see Kamala Harris as being that person. But I guess the broader point I'm making here, it's not just a matter of changing the person at the top. That person at the top has to change, actually present themselves, as it were, as a different kind of Democrat. And it's not clear to me anyone's got the guts to do that at this point, even if they did get the sort of were awarded the nomination somehow.
Right. Pull a Bill Clinton.
Yeah, they're not there. The Bill Clintons of the party are not coming out of the woodwork.
But the reason they picked Joe Biden was that he at least presented the veneer of moderation in 2020. Bernie Sanders was about to get the nomination, and so everybody got out of the race and rallied around Biden at South Carolina to stop Bernie from taking over the party, and he governed in many ways like a Bernie Sanders Democrat, but he at least had the veneer of moderation. She doesn't even have the pretense of being a moderate. GovTrack says that she ranks her as the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate, to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. She was not just for the Green New Deal, she was for Medicare for all. She said she wanted to get rid of private health insurance. She said she wanted to end fracking, which I don't know how you win Pennsylvania when you're for ending fracking.
Very bad idea.
It's
very bad idea.
It's literally, the veneer is off with her, isn't it? She's effectively a member of the squad.
But do people remember any of that stuff, right? I mean, if she really wanted to reinvent herself and really use the power she's been awarded as the presumptive nominee who somehow got to beat Trump, and she sort of suddenly reversed course on a lot of these things. I don't know, it might play, but I just think the probability of doing that is small. Yes, he has a record a mile long of being way more left of the country. She's a liberal California Democrat. This is not where the median working class voter is in this country. So you can at least try to get rid of that by repositioning yourself on things like crime and immigration, maybe on climate stuff. I don't know. But is she going to be able to do it? Look at what she's doing already with her record as prosecutor, okay? This is something that could conceivably be turned in her favor. She actually ran as a tough on crime candidate initially in the Bay Area. But why she's referring to herself as a prosecutor now? Because it's all about Trump. I know Trump is a criminal because I prosecuted criminals. I've done this and that to this and that kind of criminal. But conspicuously missing is how she's going to be tough on actual crime, violent crime, street crime, what she's going to do with actual criminals who aren't people like Donald Trump. Is she going to put, 200,000 police officers on the street? It would be good if she said it. I think that would help her, but will she say it? No, but I think she's very happy to try to use her profile as a prosecutor to just sort of beat like a drum on this thing of Trump's a convicted felon, which I think so far has been a loser for the Democrats. The whole idea that you were going to take down Trump by talking a lot about how he's a convicted felon so far has proven to be fool's gold. It just doesn't work that well. But I think she's going to double down on this stuff. At least that's what I see right now.
See, the problem with you, Rui, and you, Mark, and if people could see me, they would be pointing, they would know I'm pointing just like Kamala does, is that you cannot imagine what will be unburdened by what was.
By what has been? You're right. That is my
You're
problem.
imagining what can be unburdened by Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
they're going to
that's
send
also
me
a
to the
problem.
unburdened by what might have been, what has been camp.
Gulag.
A lot of us there.
You're going to be the burdened by what has been gulag. All right, so I have two important things I want to ask you, but I'm going to be logical in my first one.
Ooh, this is new.
So, I know this is new. I'm trying to be organized here, Mark. So I want us to stop having a good time here. She could mitigate some of this extreme leftiness by naming, because it's not a democratic process at all in either party, by naming a vice president who somehow fills the gaps in her record. The two front runners, according to all the news and the conventional wisdom in D.C. right now, are Mark Kelly and Josh Shapiro. So senator from Arizona, governor from Pennsylvania. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I think is that vice presidents typically don't make that much difference electorally, so just put that right up front. But to the extent they could help, I mean, if those are the two front runners, I'd advise Josh Shapiro, because I think he's shown an independent streak as governor of Pennsylvania. He's been effective, he's been popular, and Pennsylvania is arguably probably the tipping point state in this election. In other words, if Trump carries it, he probably wins the election. Biden carries it, Harris, maybe they win. So that would seem to be the logical thing to do. I mean, Mark Kelly is an attractive politician in some ways, and maybe part of the thinking is here, he's a border state, he said some tough things in immigration. It would help neutralize to some extent Kamala's deplorable image on the immigration issue, as she was immigration czar and did not do such a great job. So I guess that's what I think, but that and a couple bucks will get you on the metro. I don't know what's really going on there. But if I had my druthers, it would be Shapiro. And I think if you're Shapiro or Whitmer or someone like that, the theory is, well, okay, maybe we're probably not going to win. But if we don't win, then Kamala's out of the way. And I, as the vice president, might have a better shot at the nomination. Certainly if you're someone like Josh Shapiro, it makes you all of a sudden much more of a national figure than you used to be. But again, first things first, at the margin, I think this is a lot less consequential decision than people think.
Danny, you said you had two questions.
Oh, yes. I was going to let you go ahead, but if I can ask my second question.
I thought you had a logical flow, so I didn't want to interrupt your logical flow.
But my second question is
because it's such a rare thing
unrelated.
from you that I didn't want to interfere.
If I were close to you, Mark Thiessen, I would smack you on those very attractive glasses you're wearing, but I'm not. No, my question is not sequential. It's different. I wanted to ask about how she does against Trump. So if you have something on the vice presidential stuff, go ahead.
Well, I have a slightly different question, which is one of the problems she has, and I'm going to say this in an indelicate way, is that she comes across at least as dumber than a bucket of rocks. She gives an interview where she says, Ukraine is a small country, which is next to a large country called Russia. And Russia, the large country, invaded Ukraine, the small country, and we think that's wrong. I mean, this is...
Well, Mark, wait a minute. I mean, until she pointed all this stuff out, I didn't know what to think about Ukraine.
Exactly.
So I thought that was very helpful, to my pea-sized brain.
Exactly. So she talks down to people and talk like they're stupid.
This was a black audience on top of everything else.
She has a habit of saying things that are very, very dumb in a voice that is very profound. Like there's a significance to the passage of time. And then she says it over and over again, like it's right. One of the most profound insights. And this is why she's such an unsuccessful politician. And then she had that interview where she said, "Look, well, why haven't you been to the southern border?" "Well, I've been to the border." "No, you haven't." "Well, I haven't been to Europe either."
That'll play a lot in.
Are we one bad interview or one bad press conference away from the Democrats going back into a spiral of panic?
Well, I don't think in and of itself. I think that if, in fact, there are some of these unfortunate interviews or wacky things that she says or cackles or whatever gets widely publicized and proximate to that, her poll ratings start declining, then I think you see the Democrats back in the slough of despond. I mean, right now they're all full of hope and vigor and vim and spring in their step. This is like a new ball game, blah, blah, blah. But Kamala is basically you're pointing out. And I would not say she's dumb as a bucket of rocks. I think she's actually probably pretty smart. I just think she doesn't have any smarts about stuff like that, how to present yourself, how to talk to people, or emotional intelligence or something. I don't know what it would be. Verbal. I mean, it's just, she doesn't come off well. She doesn't know how to do it. And I don't see why that would change that much, why her poor judgment and how she presents herself and the things she says to different audiences, I don't see why that would change. It might. But I think she may not be dumb as a bucket of rocks, but she's in some ways as good a campaigner as a bucket of rocks.
I didn't mean to insult buckets of rocks. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, this is a problem. Now, maybe she'll solve it. She'll get some media training. I don't know. I mean, again, people aren't dumb. They watch people, they see their affect, they see how they talk about things, and they make their own judgments, right? And I think the more they see of Kamala, the less they may like her. We'll see.
I actually think she probably is dumb and the expression Mark, I believe, is box of rocks. At least that's the one we used about a previous California senator.
Maybe in Australia.
Yeah.
Nope.
Here it's buckets, baby.
Yeah, we got bucket
there you
here,
go.
baby. We're a big country.
I believe that you both are idiots. But let me move on.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love you anyway. So lots of triumphalism on the Democratic side. It was an ugly moment, and we all know it was an ugly moment, and it was ugly for the Democratic Party. And to my mind, I think, and I doubt you guys disagree, this is a position that in some ways Joe Biden put them in. So, massive outpouring of relief and cash and everything else. Once Joe, the dead weight at the top of the ticket is gone. Now we've got Kamala. We can pretend for a little while, as you say. But I'm interested in this article. Tim Alberta had a piece in The Atlantic, and he says, this is exactly what the Trump team feared. Okay. You're right. We haven't seen a lot of numbers, and all of the numbers we have seen still had Biden in them. And so that skews everything, I think, a lot. But is this really what the Trump team fears?
You always have to sort of adjust somewhat from the biases or the preferences of the people writing these articles. Tim Alberta really hates Trump, and hey, I get that. But, I think we should nevertheless remain clear-eyed about what the nature of this contest is. I think, obviously, Trump they were happy running against Biden. They would have preferred he stayed in. He was a probability maximizing candidate. But it may be overstating the case that makes it sound like, oh my God, they're in a tizzy now. They have to deal with Kamala. All their plans are out the window. If you don't think they've been planning for this for months, you're wrong, right?
They had an ad up within 5 minutes of Biden.
So yeah, they've got a plan, and they will execute it well. They've been running a pretty disciplined campaign so far, much smarter than they did in 2020, and I would expect them to do a lot of the obvious things in terms of trying to take her down. Is it true that they would have preferred Biden staying in? Oh, absolutely, but I don't think they're like quaking in their boots now because Kamala is replacing Biden. I think that's probably not right.
I got the sense that the coalescing around her, one of the additional reasons is that they've been in this circular firing squad for weeks since the debate, and there was a desire to unite quickly. You only got 100 days to organize a campaign, to get her out there, to start campaigning against Trump, and they didn't want to waste another 2 weeks or so in any kind of process but isn't the problem with that is that the primary process tests the mettle of a candidate. Sometimes people look good on paper and then they don't pan out all that well when they actually hit the hustings. You can look on the Republican side. Tim Scott looked like the out of central casting for the Republican Party in the primaries and just couldn't connect. He wasn't able to do that. We have a record on her, and she didn't even make it to 2020. She was out before Iowa last time around because she was such a terrible candidate. Are they hurting themselves by not having some sort of a competitive process where you at least have to have a debate among the Democrats, more than one candidate, and have a debate and have some testing to see who's the best person to take? They're making a real wager on somebody who's not a proven winner, shall we say.
Yeah, no, she's failed upwards, and this is the latest iteration of that. Yeah, I think basically it's true that they would, if this was a year ago, they would have been well served by an open process. But I get why they're not doing it now. They're risk averse, right? There are too many things that could go wrong with a somewhat open process at this point. If someone really runs against Kamala, then they accuse that person of being a racist. Do they need that mishigas now? Probably not. It's like too close to the election. And I think that they're probably doing the smart thing by closing ranks around her. They're stuck with her. So the best thing to do is put a good face in it, get everybody excited, get everybody on board. And, she is who she is. We're not going to have a chance to vet her any more than we did in 2020. And that's it. It's all over. Now we just got to do this, as they say. Let's do this. I think that's the phrase that they're using a lot. Kamala is let's do this. Let's do this. Okay, yeah. saying, let's do this, and actually being able to do it are two different things.
Better Nike than Adidas is all I can say. Let me ask you about two big new Republican talking points. I want to ask you about them not because I think they have a lot of merit, because actually I don't think they have a lot of merit, but I'm curious whether you think they have any resonance, especially among Democratic voters and especially among Biden loyalists. So there's a cohort that is trying out, the Democratic Party just committed a coup against the sitting president of the United States. Basically, he was the candidate of the people, and now the vape-filled room has ousted him in the most undemocratic fashion. How can you call Donald Trump anti-democratic? Look at you, and look at what you did. That's talking point number one, and it's all over the place. And to me, it's ridiculous, but I'm curious what you think. The second talking point is, okay, Joe Biden stepped aside by tweet. And if you believe some coverage, not only by tweet, but with an auto pen. I hope that auto pen question isn't true, and has disappeared, other than a strange speakerphone call that you kind of have with your ailing grandpa. So the argument there is he should step down right now. What do you think of both of the arguments, and what do you think their resonance is?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of like shrapnel you might put around your airplane or something to try to deflect attacks, but they're probably not the main thing. It confuses the issue of democracy to talk about how undemocratic the Democrats have been. It confuses the issue of the presidency, the vice presidency, Kamala Biden, to talk about how, is he even really there and shouldn't he really step down? I don't think either of these are like going to be super effective as attacks. They just add to the confusion and take some of the, sort of slow the current momentum of Kamala. But yeah, I'm not too impressed with either one of these things. I think that I don't think they'll be with us all the way to the election. I just think this is something that seems obvious to them, people writing these talking points, to say right now. They're popular things that are repeated in social media and what have you, and sort of various spokespeople. But I ultimately don't think what it's about. It's fundamentally about making the election a referendum on the Biden administration again. And that's what they need to do. And I think that's probably what they'll concentrate on, in a referendum on Kamala and all the ways in which she's undesirable candidate, too liberal, too weird, whatever. And you want to make it about her and the Democrats. You don't want to get into endless debates about democracy and should Biden step down, should Biden not step down, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I think. I could be wrong. I'm not a political consultant, nor do I play one on TV, but that's just what I think.
Well, I think it helps neutralize the democracy issue in the sense that that's the only issue that the Democrats have to run on, because they're underwater on every single issue: the economy, the border, foreign policy. I mean, you name any issue.
Well, not on like healthcare, which
that's
should
not
run on
one of the
more, in my
top tier
opinion.
issues for
right. And climate change, they have a big advantage on
There
climate
you
change.
go. And
okay, now wait
abortion.
a minute. Here's something that's salient: abortion. They're definitely preferred in abortion, and that is fairly salient.
So they had abortion and democracy. Are
Right,
there two issues that they were
right.
going to run on, because Biden's record was such a disaster in the eyes of most people? And so this kind of neutralizes the democracy argument. Well, how many primary votes did Kamala get? 0 in either election. And on top of that, Trump's got a new line that he's testing out right now, which I think is very effective, saying, I took a bullet for democracy.
That's a good one. I hadn't heard that one.
That's a pretty good line. But taking it out of Danny's political calculations and just looking at it as an objective thing, wouldn't it be smart for the Democrats to have Joe Biden resign and have Kamala Harris run as the incumbent? I mean, be careful what you wish for, Republicans, when you're attacking them on this, because they might actually listen and make her president, and then she'd be flying around on Air Force One, and she'd have the bully pulpit of the presidency, and she could make Mark Kelly her vice president if she can get him through the House. The incumbent always has an advantage over a challenger. So wouldn't that be a smart move for them?
Well, I'd say an unequivocal maybe. I mean, I can see things that would go wrong with that. I can see things that would go right with that. And I'm fairly certain that's not going to happen. But, that would be a sort of Hail Mary move on their part. I think the time to do it, if you're going to do it, is now, though. You don't want to wait until Kamala's been candidate for a while. She's tanking. And you say, oh, okay, time to pull the ripcord. It's like, let's make Kamala president, and then she'll be the incumbent, and then she'll win.
President Harris,
right.
Make everyone's dream come true faster than you can imagine.
Yeah, right. So, Yeah, there are no really particularly great choices here for the Democrats. I think that's what's been a little lost in the euphoria over replacing Biden is still not in great shape. And, probably more likely than not to lose. We'll see. I mean, as the polling data comes in the next few weeks and the models, they start up the models again, we'll see what they have to tell us. But unless you believe that the only underlying problem the Democrats had was Joe Biden's age, then I think you have to be very cautious about thinking this is a total game changer.
Exit question for me. We've talked a lot about the Democrats. We probably should have talked more about whether the abortion issue is really going to deliver the election as some people think it is.
Why don't you ask that then, Danny?
Well, okay, you can answer that question, but I want to get my exit question in as well, which is, so go with abortion first, and then I want to know what you think about the choice of J.D. Vance. We haven't talked about the Republicans at all. I know what you said about vice presidents, but I'm still curious.
Right. Okay. Well, the abortion issue, I mean, I think that we know from previous elections, from data, that there are tons of people who are pro-choice who are still willing to vote Republicans and vote for, pro-choice ballot measures and still vote Republican. So the idea that it was going to be this big game changer, sort of automatically push the election over to their side to have a lot of abortion referenda and to talk about it endlessly, I think was never actually correct. I think it does help the Democrats, but I think it's not determinative in any way. And actually, Trump has done a very smart thing, obviously, in trying to neutralize it as much as possible as an issue by saying, let's leave it to the states. You're a liberal state, you want to have a liberal law? Cool. You're a conservative state, you want a conservative law? Cool. It's democracy. We'll leave it to the states, and no, there will not be a national law. I think that's the best they can do at this point, and it's smart. And I think that will, in fact, take some of the edge off the issue. In terms of the Vance choice, I mean, I'm definitely come down. And I think if you take a cold-eyed look at his, vice presidents don't add that much at the margin, but sometimes they do at the margin. Does this help Trump in terms of actually winning this election? I'd say probably not. It might even be a bit of a drawback if it turns off some suburban moderates. But I think it does mean a lot about the direction of the Republican Party and sort of the next iteration of Trumpian populism and sanding off some of the rough edges and having a more coherent policy and ideological perspective. So, I'm hardly the first person to say it, but this is the victory of Trump's working class populism, or could represent it in the party as a whole. And it sets Vance up very well, obviously, for the future if they do win this election. So I think that's the significance. It's about the trajectory of the Republican Party. It's not so much about this election, where I don't think it's that important.
Well, you set me up for my exit question perfectly, because it seems like this election is a test of two theories for both sides, right? So on the Democratic side, Joe Biden campaigned as a moderate, as a uniter, and then has essentially governed with moderate veneer, but basically following pretty far left policies. And now they've nominated Kamala Harris, who is, for all intents and purposes, a member of the squad. So if they lose dramatically, is there going to be a rethinking in the Democratic Party? We need to go more in the Josh Shapiro direction, the Mark Kelly direction, the sort of moderate, centrist, more palatable, less socialist point of view. And if they lose, and if Republicans lose, we've now doubled down on Trumpism, and with the Trump Vance ticket, which is like the apogee of Trumpism, right? If the Republicans lose after having lost the 2022 midterms, where, Joe Biden, the most unpopular president since World War II, pulled out the best midterm performance of any president since John F. Kennedy, except for Bush after 9/11. And Republicans said, nope, we're doubling down. And Nikki Haley said, if I was running, we'd be winning by 20 points right now. Is there now, or if Trump loses, is there a rethinking in the Republican Party and a resurgence of sort of the Haley wing of the party? Or are both trains going to continue steamrolling down the tracks they're on, regardless of what the results are?
Well, the best predictor of the future is always the present. So, I mean, I would not rule out that whatever the outcome is, both parties pretty much continue down the same path. But I do think there's a possibility of real rethinkings on both sides. If the Democrats lose again to Trump, the guy's basically if not fascist, fascism adjacent. We lost the struggle, the heroic struggle against Trump. Why couldn't we beat this guy? I think certainly the obvious answer would be to a lot of people, well, okay, we've just gone too far in a direction that voters don't like. We're too left on cultural issues, or too left on climate. Maybe we spent too much money. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, people would there'd be some rethinking, and there would be representatives in the party who would potentially try to push that. Whether they succeed in, I wrote a piece the other day I called Last Hurrah for the Brahmin Left. And I think you could look at this election, if the Democrats lose, as the last hurrah of the Brahmin left, the sort of college-educated liberal domination of this particular left party, the Democrats, this iteration of it. And maybe there'd be a thirst for doing something new because of, the market has spoken, they don't like us, so maybe we need to do something different. Now, if Trump loses, I think it's, there will certainly be people who will advocate for a really different approach. But will it go back to traditional sort of Reagan-oriented conservatism or even Nikki Haley's version of it? I've got my doubts about that. But I do think there will be a recognition we need to have a different approach that can retain a lot of our populist working class base, but not alienate so many people on the other side, and maybe just have a better policy approach that makes more sense to people. The Trump ship has sailed. We have to do something different. I don't think you're going to go back to the previously existing iteration of the Republican Party, but I do think there would be an impetus to be different than sort of what we're seeing now, which is a trajectory toward a really full-throated, working class-oriented populism with all these sort of pretty non-Republican, non-conservative things attached to it. So we get more of a synthesis of the old and new Republicans. Whereas if Trump wins, we'll get more just, I think, going down the current railroad tracks. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Makes perfect sense. Depressing as hell. Makes perfect sense. Thank you, Rui, so much for taking the time. As always, it's so great. I just hope we're all wrong and everything will go great, and somehow we will be led by people who I like.
Yeah, don't hold your breath on that one. But anyway, no, it's great talking to you guys, and let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
We will.
Love having
Thank
you
you
at
again.
AEI.
Oh, I love being there.
So, Danny, what do you think?
So, Mark, you said something really interesting, and I think it's, I don't think that it's well, hey, it had to happen. Even a blind hog.
Blind squirrel finds an acorn.
Exactly. You downgraded yourself from a blind hog to a blind squirrel.
I think a blind squirrel is cuter, more appropriate for me.
It is cuter. There you go. You're definitely petite and
I'm
rodentish.
definitely
But
cuter
anyway,
than a blind hog.
there you go. But I digress. So you said Trump has been running a very disciplined campaign. You said that in the last part of our conversation with Rui, and I think that's absolutely true. And actually, a lot of credit to Lara Trump, who I think everybody thought of as Nepo baby number 46 from Donald Trump, and who actually seems to have pulled off a very good convention. And she and his campaign managers seem to be keeping him in a pretty disciplined space. So the question is it going to stay that way? And would it still be possible for him to lose to Kamala Harris? What do you think?
I think it's possible for either side to lose. I mean, if you look at the polling numbers, even after the debate, before the debate, Trump was winning outside the margin of error in 3 of the 7 key swing states. And after the debate, he was outside the margin of error in 4, maybe 5, depending on the polls. He inched up a couple of points. And there were some polls that showed him ahead out of the margin of error in all of them, but not inconsistently. So he was already ahead. So even to go a little bit ahead was putting the election out of range. And I think one of the ways they convinced Joe Biden was to show him that he had no path to victory. So that's where the Democrats start right now, with no path to victory. And so the question becomes, can Kamala Harris put them back on a path to victory? It's going to be close. There are a lot of people who don't like what's happened in the last 4 years, but also don't like Donald Trump, what they call the double haters. And they could be the swing voters in this election, the double haters who didn't like Biden, and probably don't like Harris either, and don't like Trump. And they got to choose between 2 candidates that they don't like. And so the part of the challenge for Trump is to show them that they dislike her more than him. There was a really interesting, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the pod before, but I mentioned it on Fox News a couple of times. There was a New York Times poll that asked voters, has Donald Trump ever said anything to offend you? And 6 in 10 said either never or not recently, right? And with younger voters, it was 7 in 10. That's pretty good for Donald Trump. One of the things that happens when a former president leaves office is they're not in the spotlight every day. And so people sort of soften their views of them and forget about the things that they found offensive about them. And so Trump's challenge is not to remind them why they disliked him. And that's going to be hard because I think he has a lot of contempt for Kamala Harris. The debate, if it happens, will be quite a political spectacle.
I can't wait.
It's his to win, but he hasn't won it.
Well, it's his to win, but we know Donald Trump. He could still lose. And on that realistic note, if we have it, thank you everybody for being with us. Don't hesitate to let us know what you think, and take care.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.